we may not have had a lot of sunshine this spring, but my sun-loving plants are still putting on a really brave show. I'm absolutely delighted with the little dwarf irises that I planted last year. They're giving me some marvellous flowers here, and they're super plants for a small garden because they range in size from about 4 inches high to no more than a foot, and in a whole range of colours too, ranging from the very dark purple Campbelli here through to the very pale pastel colours like Iris Stapleford there. Wonderful plant, that. There are some good bicolours as well, like Lavandula plicati here. But I suppose my favourite of all is this green and yellow Forest Lights. That's a good name. Now, these are growing in the very well-drained soil of my Mediterranean garden, but they'll grow in almost any garden soil, provided you give them lots of sunshine. And bear in mind that I planted these last summer, and when I bought them, they were only just one spike of leaves like that. They put on all that growth this year. So they've got to be a good investment. There are some plants that really need beating into submission. A few years ago, I planted here one plant of Seneccio tangutica. It's a beautiful plant with lovely, striking foliage, tall and graceful, with, later on in the year, some nice yellow flowers. The only trouble is that it is a real invasive spreader. You can see those roots. Now, I've been trying to dig those out 3 times this season. I've gone over it, and still they're coming back. It certainly isn't a plant that you can grow in the border, but it's one that I want to keep, so I've devised another way of doing it. You may remember that a couple of weeks ago I sowed this area down to grass. Well, it hasn't come through yet, but eventually it will mean that this bed is completely surrounded by grass, and that's the place to grow these really invasive plants. Certainly they will try and push their roots underneath the grass and come up through it, but of course the mower will cut them off all the time and completely foil that plan. So this is the place to plant them. There are quite a few other plants that you've really got to watch out for too, and one that I'm quite worried about is Sedum acre. This is the golden type, and I've seen this in garden centres quite a lot in their rockery plant section. And I can tell you this, that if you planted one of those in your rock garden, it would take over the whole thing in a matter of months rather than years. Things like this little Linearia dalmatica, that's a toadflax with delightful little yellow snapdragon flowers, but that too is quite invasive. So if you see a plant that's labelled invasive, this is the place to grow it. I'm going to put all mine in here and let them fight it out together. But of course, it's not only running roots that are a problem. Some plants will seed themselves all over the border. This is one called Papaver somniferum. It has some wonderful blooms on it, and it will produce millions of plants from seed, but of course they're never where you want them. But that's no problem. You just pull out the ones that you don't want and leave in the ones that you do.
We're in the shadows of the Malvern Hills, in beautiful countryside where the composer Edward Elgar wrote some of his finest music. And here, at the Three Counties Showground, the keynote is colour, because we've come to see the Malvern Spring Gardening Show. It's a joint venture set up in partnership with the Royal Horticultural Society to get away from London and the home counties and out into the countryside, so people from all over can come here and enjoy a feast of colourful flowers and get some pretty good ideas for their gardens too. Put a beautiful flower like the clematis into the hands of a really artistic exhibitor, and this is the result you get. This has been staged by Treasures of Tenbury, a very famous clematis firm in this area, and they've got some lovely doubles on display today. Look at Countess of Lovelace. The shape of those flowers is marvellous. And then when the second batch come later in the year, they'll be single. And another coloured double is Vivian Pennell. Rather a strange combination, but very nice all the same. And what about this? beautiful, soft, pale pink, almost white. This is Dawn, making a lovely ground cover plant here. And then for a darker shade, another double, Haku Ukan. Just look how they've put those flowers amongst these beautiful golden leaves of the birch. Now, that's really artistic. One of the essential ingredients of this show is that visitors can get professional help with their garden problems. There's a team of experts here from the RHS, including our own Pippa Greenwood.
Look at this one here. When the leaf has actually dropped off because it's died, the little bud springs into action and you'll get replacement growth coming from there. So it'll look a lot better, not immediately, I must admit, but it'll look a lot better come the end of the year.
Well done. OK, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, of course, it's not just all these diseased and dying plants which make me really enjoy this sort of flower show. There's always a tremendous atmosphere and there's a wonderful array of really beautiful plants. Something that really caught my eye was this stand. How about this for a really gorgeous display of sweet peas? There's not only a tremendous range of colours, but surrounding the whole stand is a really deep and intense scent. And the growers of these sweet peas, Sylvia and Norman Brackley, were really well rewarded because last year they entered 25 shows and in each one they won the coveted gold medal. But for me, the best thing about any sweet pea is that the more you pick them, the more flowers they produce. Of course, everyone loves to grow a few herbs in the garden, but if you think carefully before you plant, you can make sure that they're not only useful, but that the whole layout is actually really attractive as well, like this gorgeous herb wheel. And the plants themselves should be chosen carefully, because something like this sage is certainly very useful when it comes to cooking, but the plant really isn't tremendously attractive. But this version, which has got a 3-coloured leaf, is a really attractive plant itself.
Well, a new exhibitor here with his bromeliad collection is jet-setting nurseryman Mike Harridge.
Oh, I'm not really jet-setting. We're a very small company. It's just my wife and myself. And we just sell the plants, that we grow over in our nursery in Sri Lanka.
It's a pretty exotic collection. Can one grow these in an ordinary sitting room?
Well, you could. They're very well adapted, really, for a sitting room condition because they don't have soil, which is one huge advantage.
Because they don't have roots, do they?
They have roots, but it's only for holding on to the branches or whatever media that you put them on, because the main thing they want is the drainage.
So it's not a good idea to sit them in a shell or a
Oh
pot
no,
at all.
it's really not a good idea to put them into shells or any hard ceramic surface, because if you keep them on wood, in some place it can drain, you would get, from one plant, you would get a whole cluster of plants in years to come. But whatever you do, don't put them on television sets or, and windowsills where you would get, the direct heat throughout the day, because it's almost like putting it in a microwave, with the double glazed windows. The heat comes in there and literally just cooks the plants.
I believe you've got an exciting event coming up next week, your first Chelsea. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely astonished, to be invited to do Chelsea, because we only started exhibiting last year. So it's really amazing. It's actually like picking someone, jogging somewhere around and asking him, would you like to do the Olympics? It's just thrilling to do it. I'm really looking forward to it.
I was really surprised to find not only a lot of gorgeous plants, but also a bit of gardening history. There's some really extraordinary looking plants, some of which were really popular in the pre-Victorian era when conservatories were first developed. But many of these plants are now being reintroduced by Noel Kingsbury.
I first became interested in growing these plants about 5 years ago, and this is one of my favourites. Everyone thinks it's a fern, but in fact it's a dwarf shrub from Western Australia, Dryandra terridifolia. There's this wonderful fern-like foliage with pink new growth. Another good conservatory plant is the abutilon. This is a variety called Patrick Singe. They're becoming quite popular as conservatory plants again. They were first introduced from Mexico in the 1830s. A lot of cultivars were raised, and most of these have been lost to cultivation. But this one is still with us. It's very good. In fact, it's almost hardy. Lovely orange flowers produced from March right through to November.
No, I believe you're exhibiting at Chelsea this year for the first time. What do you feel about that?
Well, it's very exciting. It's very nerve-wracking as well, but I feel very excited exhibiting plants at Chelsea that have never been exhibited before, or perhaps not since the end of the last century.
You know, one of the great pleasures of gardening is being able just to sit down and relax in the middle of all the flowers and really enjoy them. I wish I had more time to do it at home, but I don't. I always seem to be too busy. Well, the Malvern Spring Gardening Show won't be here now until next year, but most of the best exhibitors will be trundling on down to Chelsea, and you can catch up with them there. We'll certainly be going, and I'm really looking forward to it.
You may remember earlier in the year we were sowing tomato seeds. Well, they're ready to be planted out now, and we're very fortunate here because this is a newly dug border and there's no reason at all why the plants can't go straight into this soil. But of course I've had to remove some staging and also the panelling at the side to let the light through that they'll need to grow. I'm growing Gardener's Delight because it's one of my favourite tomatoes with small sweet fruit, and also a much larger variety called Breakfast Tomato with big beefsteak-like fruits, which are surprisingly sweet for their size. What I'm doing is planting into a slight depression so that when I water them in and subsequently water during summer when the soil's dry, the water will hold around the tomatoes a little bit better. I've added some bloodfish and bone, a general fertiliser to the soil to get them going. And I'm going to be taking off all the side shoots as well. You can just see them on this plant. That will have to be done right the way throughout the life of the tomato. Now, after about 2 or 3 weeks, once they've got established and their roots are down, I can start liquid feeding, and I'll start off with a fairly general, well-balanced feed. But as soon as the first trusses are formed, go over to a high potash feed for the fruits. If you're not lucky enough to have a border, or you can't use your borders because they've got very old soil in them, then don't forget you can grow tomatoes in the greenhouse, in grow bags or in pots. But these will need much more water than those planted in the borders, especially during a hot, dry summer. But it's worthwhile growing them under glass because, of course, you get much earlier fruit. Judging from the comments I get as I move up and down the country, it would seem that you either love or hate cacti. I think it's a great pity if you don't like them because they're a fascinating group of plants, and I'm sure the only reason you don't like them is because they have a reputation for being boring. Now, I don't think these are boring at all. There's a great range of different shapes and sizes and colours, lots of different coloured flowers, often on very tiny plants, which makes them ideal for a small collection in a small, cool greenhouse. The first plant I ever grew was a cactus, and I think a lot of children find them fascinating and like to start off with them. They're small and fairly easy to grow. But as you tend to get older, you look at cacti and think, well, they come from deserts, they're well able to take care of themselves, and you start neglecting them. And that's the slippery slope to beginning to think they're boring, because if you neglect them, they won't grow properly and they rarely flower. So between really March and October, you've got to water them much as any other plant. You maybe let them get a little bit drier on the surface between waterings, but otherwise it's important to make sure they do get plenty. And a plant like this in a very large pot, this is Mammillaria bombicina, which is going to grow and spread right over this, will need quite a lot of water in one go. Then you let it dry out again before watering once more. It helps to feed them occasionally with a special cactus fertiliser like this one, which doesn't have very much nitrogen in it. And also, don't let them get too pot-bound. Watch for the cacti growing out towards the pot, and when they get to about this stage, before they reach the edge of the pot, using a piece of newspaper to make a collar around the prickly body of the plant so you protect your fingers. Just ease it out of the pot and you'll see, in fact, that the roots are quite well formed there. Now, you'll need a special cactus compost with plenty of grit in for good drainage. Just place some in the bottom. Make sure, I just have to readjust this newspaper, that the plant is at the right height in there. And then feed in around. It's quite a tricky job, pushing down very gently. When you've got plenty of space, you can use your fingers to push the compost down. But if you're a bit short of space with larger cacti, use a stick, something like the end of a cane, just to firm the compost down. I'm not going to give a really perfect finish to this because I want to leave room for some gravel, which is going to go over the top and helps the water move through the compost faster there. It also stops soil splashes, and I think it looks nice as well. Now this really is worth doing. A Mammillaria boccasana I bought last year at this size I potted on, and in a year it's almost doubled. It's possible to grow cacti from seed as well. These were sown in February, and you can see they're already beginning to look like miniature cacti. And within 8 years from seed you could get something as large as this. Now this isn't a particularly free-flowering cactus. I think if you're starting off and you're buying cacti, you want to go for the smaller flowering types like Mammillarias and Rebutias. Rebutia violaciflora, for instance, has so many flowers they almost dwarf the plant. And Rebutia grandiflora, with those lovely red flowers almost like trumpets. And for white flowers, a long succession of them, Mammillaria zilmaniana alba.
When it's spring again, I'll bring again tulips.
From Amsterdam? Well, no it isn't, not this one. This is from a garden in Cambridgeshire, and it's very, very special because it's one of a dying breed. I've actually become rather attached to it. Well, we've had Save the Whale and Save the Rainforest. What about saving the tulip? Now, let me try and explain. This is actually called a florist's tulip, but it's got nothing to do with these, the ones that you buy at the florist shop in the corner. This is a tulip that's chock full of history, and it's also, incidentally, chock full of virus, and that's what gives it these stripes. But to try and understand the quite extraordinary story of these English florist tulips, we have to go all the way back to the court of Louis XIV. And there, the noblemen had grown tired of chasing each other's wives and decided to take up gambling. But they didn't gamble on horses or on cards. They gambled, would you believe, on tulip bulbs. I know this sounds absolutely crazy, but they actually bet vast sums of money, their estates even, on trying to predict the pattern that the flowers, like this little fellow here, would show when the petals opened. Can you imagine anything more ridiculous? Well, anyway, in due course, the florist tulips came to England, and they were actually very popular in the gardens of the gentlefolk. But then, in time, the gentry grew tired of them, and they would actually have died out altogether, had it not been that they were then adopted by the working classes. And they found that these show tulips, like auriculas and laced pinks, made very good subjects as show flowers. Now, that was in the 19th century. Now we're at the end of the 20th. So enter Timothy Clark and his garden here in Cambridgeshire. Timothy, all of these look pretty similar to me, but I believe there are several different varieties here. How do you tell them apart?
They're quite easily told. There are three basic groups. One is bizarre, which is the yellow and brown. The second is the rose, which is red and white, or pink and white. And the third, biblomen, is black and white, or blue and white.
So those are colour differences?
Those are the colour differences.
But here we've got pattern differences.
Indeed, yes. This one is a breeder. As you can see, there are no marks at all, and a breeder is one which is still unaffected by the virus.
So there are no streaking on the petals?
That's right, at all.
And then this one?
Here, if you look, you can see the feathering round the edge, which borders it.
And that's called a feathered variety?
And that is called a feathered variety of bizarre.
And this one?
Is a flame, where it goes right up the centre of the petal.
Rather like a flame flickering outwards.
As you say, yes.
I think that's pretty clear. Roughly how many varieties are there still surviving in the world today?
There are probably about 30 varieties, but some are down to only 1 or 2 bulbs now.
That really is bordering on extinction.
It really is, yes.
What's the attraction of these things for you?
Well, it's a plant which I feel at the moment needs getting out into the world more easily, and I have the ability always to make sick plants grow. This is the one thing I'm able to do, to make anything which is sick live, and these tulips are one I've just taken under my wing for the moment.
Like the cultivation of invalids.
Maybe so. Well, look at the sick dogs around here.
All right, reveal the secrets. How do you make sick plants grow?
Well, principally nowadays I avoid peat, I think.
Yes.
Peat is bad news because, really, a plant like this, if it was growing in a bog, wouldn't be anywhere. It isn't a bog plant. Moving one stage on, as soon as these plants have finished their flower, I take the heads off and I let them make 6 weeks growth. And during that 6 weeks, I'll look after them very carefully. I'll probably give them a foliar feed.
But presumably, growing them in your kitchen garden as you do, this must mean you've got to fit them into your vegetable rotation.
Yes, very quickly done. With peas and beans, muck the garden hard for the potatoes, into the potatoes, and by having the tulips out, as soon as those stems are just on the weak side, that means I can then put the Brussels sprouts straight in.
Right, Timothy, you better show us how you dig one of these tender little patients up.
Well, they're about 3 inches deep. I usually try to plant at 3 inches. They come up like this.
That's the planting depth there.
That's the plant, and I let the whole of the foliage die off. Having done this, I sort the bulbs out and give them a dust of flowers of sulphur, and that is the end of the season.
And then they're put in paper bags?
Put into paper bags until November. The traditional day for planting is Lord Mayor's Show Day.
In a sense, though, Timothy Clark, in his relatively mild East Anglian garden, is actually an outpost of modern-day florist tulip interest. Because of the many specialist societies that once existed, only one, the Wakefield and North of England Society, now remains.
There were 10 green bottles standing on the wall. 10 green bottles standing on the wall. And if one green bottle should accidentally fall, there'd be 9 green.
Before we go any further, I must ask you why you stick your tulips in beer bottles.
Well, they're a very convenient receptacle to fit them in. We generally show them in, have the show on licensed premises so that the bottles are available.
That sounds like an extremely good arrangement.
Oh, it is, yes. It brings everybody down to the same level. They're judged on the flower, and the flower is in the bottle.
And how many people are actually in the Wakefield Society today?
Roughly about 130 members.
And they're all growing the flowers?
No. There's only roughly around about 20, up to about 20 exhibiting members.
Obviously, there is no collection of these tulips in any of the national botanic gardens and so on, so it really is down to you to keep them going, isn't it?
Yes, almost like a preservation society, keeping them going.
Is the florist tulip safe, is what I'm trying to get at?
It's stable, relatively stable, but not particularly safe.
What we're looking for is probably around about another 10 or 15 members, or people who will come, who will grow them and dedicate it and bring the blooms back to the show bench so we can maintain the standards.
There is quite simply a difficulty in obtaining enough plants, and
yes,
that presumably is where Timothy Clark comes in.
That's right. About 10 years ago we sent Timothy a collection of bulbs, probably about 50 or 60 bulbs, and you can see on his bed today there's probably about 1,000 bulbs or even more. And Timothy has, over the years, been giving them away to his friends and people who are interested in them.
This year's Wakefield Tulip Show is being held at Homefield House in Wakefield on May the 18th. But even if you miss it, you might like to join the Society and help in their efforts to preserve these weird but really wonderful flowers. Send a stamped address envelope to the Society's secretary, and that's Wendy Acres, 70 Wrenthorpe Lane, Wrenthorpe, Wakefield, West Yorkshire. Do help them. My little friend, and all these other tulips, really need you.
These wallflowers will be coming out very shortly to make way for the summer bedding. But I want to make sure that I've got a bit of colour at the back here so I can get a head start with the half-hardy perennials. They'll actually withstand a degree or two of frost, though if you live in a really cold area, then it's worthwhile for all these things waiting a week or two. The osteospermums are invaluable plants, giving you colour right the way through the season. This one's a new one on me, Chris Brickell, but what a lovely colour that is. And I shall certainly be growing silver sparkler again with those almost luminous silver blooms and, of course, variegated foliage. The argyranthemums are worth growing too, the most popular one of those being the old Jamaica primrose. But what a good plant that is with those lovely big yellow daisies right the way through the summer. And there's a new variety called Vancouver too, which is pink and has this lovely attractive shape to the blooms. Argyranthemum funiculatum is another good one to go for, with these lovely white daisies with a yellow centre and the superb divided silver foliage. And don't forget the Euryops as well. Look at the vibrant yellow of that Euryops pectinatus. Now I shall be planting these out at round about 18 inches to 2 foot apart, and they'll give me a show of colour right the way through the summer. But if I don't hurry up and get my roses trained, I won't be able to see any of my garden from the house at all, because they're getting really rampant. Now, the best way to train them, in my view, is certainly on wires, because that's much less conspicuous and they'll soon be hidden by the rows. And you can use these vine eyes which are just driven into the wall if you've got an old house with old mortar, but on a new house you'll have to drill it and plug it and put a little screw eye into it. And then you just pull your wire across, pull it as tight as you can, though even that is not that critical. Twist it round and Bob's your uncle. When you're training climbing roses, a pair of gloves is absolutely essential because they really are vicious things. But of course it's quite difficult tying them in when you've got your gloves on. So I find that just using a sweet pea ring on some of the weaker shoots is not a bad idea. And then you can just hold them there temporarily with the sweet pea ring and come in and tie them in later because the ring itself is not really strong enough to hold it permanently. You'll notice that I'm tying them in horizontally, and this is really quite important. This is a very vigorous variety called mermaid, and if you didn't tie them in horizontally, they'd go straight up, forming lots of wood and very little flower. But restricting the sap will make them flower like mad, and you can see that those shoots here will eventually go up, and you can tie that one in horizontally again to the wire above. Well, on this very day, the Archbishop of Canterbury, on behalf of the Church Urban Fund for Inner Cities, launches the great national Sponsor a Sunflower campaign. And, you know, we gardeners could raise a lot of money for this, and you ought to get your kids interested too, to start them off on gardening as well. Sunflowers are very easy to grow at this time of the year because you can sow the seeds direct outside. Just put a little bit of fertiliser down, a couple of seeds in about an inch deep, and away they'll go. Now, I'm cheating, I have to admit, because I've already started mine off in the greenhouse, so I've got a bit of sponsorship going there already. But I tell you what, if anybody can beat mine by the end of the season, then I'll chip in an extra 50 quid. If you'd like more details, write to Tim Diggle, the Church Urban Fund, 2 Great Peter Street, London, SW1P 3LX. Well, next week is the Great Chelsea Flower Show, of course, so don't miss our special programme on Wednesday at 8:10. And Gardener's World will be there too on Friday at 8:30 as usual, with a special look round for committee gardeners like you and me. Goodbye.